hitting. That's great. Thank you. So thank you so much for joining our session today. As you know, we're here to talk about what pharma can learn from the medtech industry in terms of scaling digital health. So I guess we all know that in order to make a meaningful impact on patient and healthcare outcomes, digital health must achieve scale, and we have to go beyond pilots. We have to go beyond point solutions in order to do that. Is there a clear archetype for digital health solutions that do scale? Is there a proven model? And can we look to MedTech for inspiration? Is it simply a better home for digital health and technology? In this webinar, we have Jim, Justin, and John, who will introduce themselves shortly, coming together to really discuss some real-life examples of successes and failures in digital health and what lessons they've learned as they've tried to scale various products. What can pharma learn from MedTech and vice versa? And finally, key features and key considerations to go beyond concept and to go beyond pilot to scale. So with that said, I'm gonna do a round of introductions here. So if you want to take a second to talk about what you do, who you are, and a fun fact about you, just so everybody can get to know you a little bit better. We'll start with you, Justin.
Yeah, sure. Great to be here today, and welcome all the panelists. Justin Wright. I've been working in the pharmaceutical and medtech industry for about 25 years. Started at Merck for a number of years, BD, Lilly, and most recently Novartis. Wrapped up at Novartis the beginning of March, and been doing some consulting and writing since then. In terms of fun fact, and then I've been working on digital health, connected health for about a decade now. So, across BD, Lilly, and Novartis. So really excited about where the industry's headed. Fun fact, I'm actually a synthetic organic chemist by training, so somehow made my way into digital health. And during my time as a chemist, put out 3 laboratory fires, none of which I started. So if you ever need a fire put out, just let me know. That's
great, Justin. Welcome. Jim.
Thanks, Rondoni. Hi, everyone. Jim O'Donoghue, President of S3 Connected Health. Been in the digital health space for about 20 years now, working across pharma and medtech and building solutions for global deployment and scale deployment. Fun fact is always a bit tricky. My biggest stress at the moment, I have 2 twin daughters learning to drive in my car, and we have the challenge that they have to be able to drive by the end of the summer. So that's my focus.
Good luck with that, Jim, and welcome. John.
John Rondoni. I'm the Chief Technology Officer at Inspire Medical Systems. We treat obstructive sleep apnea, which is a pretty common disorder with an implanted device. My background prior to Inspire is Medtronic, and my career has been in building implantable nerve stimulation devices for a variety of different therapies. My fun fact, calling in from Minneapolis, Minnesota, is that I'm also a hockey coach for my children's team. So we get plenty of ice time here in the winter, and it's a blast.
That's awesome. Welcome, John. And I'm Chandana. I'm the CEO at HealthXL. Just a shout out to Jim and his team from S3 for helping put together this terrific panel and this webinar today. So I think just at the outset, it's very clear we're going to get some nice perspectives. Jim, who kind of sits, has a bird's eye view of both the medtech and the pharma space. Justin, you more so on the pharma side, and John, you more so on the medtech side. So this should be really exciting. To get us started, I'm just going to bring up a quick slide, and this is one from a report that HealthXL launched last month that we are calling Pharma 3.0, Doing Digital Health Better. And just to add a bit of context to why we did this, HealthXL, we are a community for leaders across the healthcare ecosystem. So we bring together different folks to understand what the current challenges are and how to move the needle in the industry. And as part of this, one of the things we've heard, and I believe is probably common knowledge to everybody listening here, is that the tectonic plates are shifting underneath our feet. There's budgetary scrutiny all around, especially in the current economic climate around the globe. And at the same time, we've noticed there's been so many reorganizations happening across, especially the pharmaceutical industry. And what this has meant for digital health is that it's really being brought to question. What is the value that we're getting back from all of these initiatives and investments that have been made into digital health? What is the ROI, both hard and soft. And I guess as an industry, we owe some of these answers to ourselves. So what we did was we went and spoke to a number of senior leaders across the top pharma organizations from within the HealthXL community and gleaned some insights from them on how they're thinking about structuring themselves and how they're thinking about the future of what digital health means for their organization. And we put all of that together and we've come up with this framework, right? So this is really some basics in terms of how all of us could think about making sure digital health fits and solves a clear need that exists in the industry. So we've outlined some short-term objectives, which is really find what the pain point is for which digital could be the solution and not the other way around. ChatGPT is the trending topic right now. It doesn't mean we bring that in and start using it off the bat versus, is there a problem we currently have that could actually be solved by generative AI? In terms of medium-term objectives, it's about choosing the right success metrics for all stakeholders involved. One of the key things that we've discovered is that there's discontent at the end of any initiative or program when all stakeholders are not aligned on what good looks like at the end of it. It's then about rethinking resources. Typically, how a pharma company is structured may not be the most conducive to being successful in a program that involves digital health apps and wearables. So it's about bringing the right skill sets to the table to make sure that we give this the best shot that's possible. Partner for a purposeful ecosystem. This can be done alone. Pharma alone won't have all of the capabilities. The startup or the partner they bring in alone may not have all of the capabilities. We always need the regulators in the room. We need the payers in the room. So it's about creating the right ecosystem to help make this a success. And finally, once all of this has been figured out, the long-term objective is to scale with the right business models. Throughout this journey, you're trialing and testing different business models and go-to-market strategies. And when you find the one that sticks and all of the other pieces have been worked out, then you kind of, scale with the right business model. I just want to leave you with one stat. There you go. So we ran a survey over a period of several months within the HealthXL community, and this is just to leave you with some food for thought as we progress this webinar on the misaligned expectations, even in terms of what success looks like, and that kind of goes back to my point around that framework. We asked everybody what the appropriate time horizon for digital health initiatives to demonstrate value to the pharma business is. A lot of folks from the pharma community said 1 to 2 years, but a lot of people, from the health tech side actually believe it's 3 to 5 years, right? And that in itself is really important for us to meet each other at the same point to understand when can we actually achieve success. If you're interested in reading the rest of this report, Carol's going to drop a link in the chat and you're welcome to download it. So with that, I'm going to hand off to you, Justin, to maybe give us a point of view through your pharma experience over the years.
Yeah, sure. No, great. Thanks. Yeah, and just a little bit of context and as we get started, or I share some perspective on my side, and you're going to share the slides. My experience and some of the learnings that I'm sharing with you today come from my time at BD, which was MedTech, and we served pharma and worked on digital health there, moving over to Lilly for a number of years, and then certainly for about 5 years at Novartis. And I think one of the things I'd probably start with, and there's two kind of lessons I'm going to leave you with or share with you today. I think the first one is really around change management. Within the pharmaceutical industry, and I think it's one of the, think back to the last slide. Yep. The industry is built upon molecules unequivocally. If you go back 150 years and even 100 years ago when the FDA was formed, all the regulations, all the processes, all the governance is based upon molecules. And then when we start to talk about innovation, and I use this just, really nice imagery here, called the fuzzy front end, which many of you have probably seen this, it's really about exploring, and really trying to start to uncover. Within the pharmaceutical industry, this is typically molecule discovery. So we're exploring receptors, target product profiles that are designed around receptors, and things of this nature are all headed towards a clinical trial. As we introduce something like connected health or digital health, we have a pretty significant shift in what that fuzzy front end is all about. And on top of that, we're attempting to overlay one fuzzy front end with another. So the degree of complexity that emerges is not insignificant. And so I think my first lesson is really, to those of us in the pharmaceutical industry, is acknowledging that, understanding that there is a complexity associated with this, and we have to allow for it. But at the same time, we have to acknowledge and know that we're actually headed somewhere in terms of a concept and actually sanction that concept that we're trying to drive to. And so having those conversations early on, helping people understand, yes, we're going to be exploring, really trying to discover, but this is all about driving towards a concept and really starting to think a little bit different in terms of the product and product definition that we're after. And so that's probably my first thing to really leave with you is medtech is very, in my opinion, really much more designed to handle different fuzzy front ends. The pharmaceutical industry, is effective at bringing molecules to market. Time and time again, you will see challenges when you try to introduce something new that ain't the molecule. And so just acknowledging and from an organizational point of view, sanctioning those programs early on so you can get through that research, through that concept, and ultimately get a product to market. And so on the next slide, I think the other thing I would also start to share with you, and it's a bit of a busy slide, but if you look at the top, right, and this goes back to the pharmaceutical industry and just from a healthcare point of view where we're headed, the industry is built upon drugs and molecules. But what we've seen in the last 20 years or so, and probably even before then, is this transition to information and insights. And so with that, again, we have to start to think about how we integrate, the molecule, the medicine with a lot of different things. And so I think the other acknowledgement here is that if you look pre-2010-ish timeframe, and it's a little bit of an error bar there, all the things on the left, our value equation or our value axis were really about patient convenience and adherence. So early days, vial and syringe, we worked to prefilled syringe, auto injectors, and all these different things, but they were really about making things more convenient for the patient. Some of those started to ladder up to outcomes, and patient engagement and experience. And that's really where we're at today is how do you actually bring all of these things together into a fully integrated product system that has those information insights, for personalized intervention. And so closed loop is something that, that's near and dear to my heart. I know the team at S3 believes in this as well. And I think that's where we're going is really thinking about, how do we think about the medicine? How do we generate insights, via some really interesting and sophisticated digital tools? And then how do we think about behavior change in a closed loop way that increases and dramatically affects patient well-being and outcomes? And so those are the two lessons, is really thinking about change management and then also thinking about the redefinition of product as we work within the pharmaceutical industry.
Thank you, Justin. And maybe Jim, I'll ask you then to perhaps compare and contrast pharma versus medtech, because you kind of work across the board with both. Where do you think there are commonalities? Where are the differences?
Yep. And if we could just click on to the next slide, I will share a little bit about our experience and thoughts. So I was looking back, actually, we've worked at about 70 companies over the last number of years, about 50 medtech, about 20 pharma companies on different digital programs. And I guess I'd like to share a little bit what we found to be similar in terms of working with pharma and medtech and what we found to be different. So let's start with the similarities. If we think about it from an opportunity perspective, I think both pharma and medtech see it in a similar way. There's an opportunity to deliver increased clinical patient economic value through essentially enabling personalized services with digital health, and hopefully that improves outcomes for patients. It's good for clinicians, and it delivers better economic value. So I think we all see an opportunity there. The second opportunity from I suppose a business perspective for pharma and medtech, there's clearly an opportunity to differentiate through using digital health, whether with pharma that be around creating connected drug delivery solutions with digital therapy management associated with that, or whether with medtech, whether it's about connecting digital health solutions to wearable or implantable devices, or even offering pre-post surgery support for patients. So clearly offering those types of services versus not offering them is an opportunity to differentiate inside the kind of core market. And the third main common opportunity, I think, is this opportunity to gather real world data and understand the actual experience that patients are having in the real world and how that's impacting outcomes. And ideally, from a business perspective, both pharma and medtech are looking to see whether we can associate those outcome measurements and the data that we're able to gather in real world with use of the core products. So common set of opportunities, I think a common way of looking at it. From a common challenges perspective, I think, and Justin referred to it, there's a big change management challenge here. There's a lot of new capabilities to be developed both inside pharma and inside medtech. It ranges from developing, new technical capabilities, new regulatory capabilities, developing new go-to-market channels, and also managing the internal stakeholder expectations around margins, which, often for digital health products are quite different to the margins that might be expected around core pharmaceutical products, for example. And there's also this external challenge, which is to become a trusted player and participant beyond the core product that's being offered. And that's a challenge because there's lots of players offering digital health solutions. Large tech is coming into the space. There's a lot of digital health solution providers and players, and there has to be a reason why, and I think pharma and medtech have to earn the reason why they can offer solutions and services that are beyond those core products. So I think these are common opportunities and challenges. And if we just switch to the next slide, I think there's also a set of really important key differences also between pharma and medtech when it comes to digital health. The first is kind of an obvious one. It's around the fact that I think digital health solutions are closer to the core of what medtech and medical device vendors typically deliver than they are to the core of what pharmaceutical companies deliver. On the medtech side, typically digital health solutions are quite integrated with the core product. They're useful not just in terms of improving the patient experience, but they're also part of sometimes provisioning the product, managing the device itself. Whereas on the pharmaceutical side, often the digital health solutions are built to support the patient experience. Sometimes they're related to the specific therapy. Sometimes they're not even related to the specific therapy. They're more around the disease area. So they're seen as complementary, a little bit more optional, I would think, than they are on the medtech side. The second key difference, I think, is where digital health initiatives tend to sit inside both medtech and pharma. I think within medtech, what we've seen is that the digital health is usually seen as part of the roadmap, part of the R&D roadmap. It's owned within R&D and within product management, and it's part of the roadmap of the core product, and it's enhancing the overall experience around the core product. I think within pharma, we see a lot more variety. Digital health initiatives sometimes are started by commercial teams in countries, sometimes they're started by franchise owners, sometimes they're started by the brand teams, sometimes started by market access. And there's a broad set of stakeholders around medical, quality, legal, etc. So the environment is more complex and the ownership is more complex. And that relates to the third point, which is around the kind of investment and portfolio management culture within the two different types of companies. Again, within medtech, typically because the product and the digital health product is part of the evolution and roadmap of the product, it's managed in that context. It's managed as part of the roadmap. Within pharma, often digital health is seen as one of the ways to achieve a number of things. And other ways could be, for example, different types of multi-channel marketing, improving patient support programs, etc. And often those initiatives the digital health initiatives within pharma are reviewed on a periodic basis, sometimes against this zero-based budgeting process, and they constantly have to kind of prove themselves. And they're also, because they're one of a number of ways, I think, that pharma sees that it can achieve things, sometimes they can be collateral damage when other events happen inside pharma companies. The fourth one is, and I referred to it on the previous slide, but I think there is a difference in terms of the gap for pharma and for medtech in terms of the new capabilities to grow. I think on the medtech side, yes, there's differences in terms of there's new technologies, but they're still essentially IT type technologies. There is a new model, but again, the sales teams are used to bringing technology to their customers, so it's not completely new. There is a bit of a new mindset that's required, which is that, digital health solutions that are going to be used by patients, the standard they're measured against is the standard digital solutions are measured against in other industries. So the expectations for patients is quite high in terms of user experience and usability. That's a little bit new for medtech. On the pharma side, the technology is new. I think the model and the go-to-market model is new, and the channel is also new. So I think there's a lot more things happening on the pharma side in order to make digital health initiatives successful. And the final point is there is a difference, I think, between the nature of the relationships between pharma companies and research organizations and clinical research than there is on the medtech side. I think pharma has a bigger focus on cooperations around basic science and research and constantly scanning for new innovations that are coming out of those organizations. Whereas I think medtech's a little bit better at partnering with clinicians to co-create products, essentially. So there are some of the key differences, and the so what of all of that is on the next slide, which is, I think the net impact of that from a pharma perspective is that some of digital health initiatives can be seen inside the organization as more nice to have than must have because they're not part of the core roadmap. I think because there's a broader set of stakeholders, there's a bigger effort around constantly keeping stakeholders aligned. And also that means there can be a bit of a slower budgeting and decision-making process around it. I think because digital health initiatives are part of a broader portfolio in an environment where pharma companies are used to essentially making decisions to stop, start, and go ahead with certain initiatives, there's more likelihood that digital health initiatives in pharma currently, more likelihood, I would say, that they will get stopped. And because the technology model and channel is new, there are more failure points, not just in terms of creation of the digital health solution, but in terms of the path to adoption and scaling in the market. And then finally, as I said, I think there is an opportunity, which isn't totally used at the moment, to be more in a co-creation mode with clinicians around creating digital health solutions that go around and support pharmaceutical products. So that's just a kind of a broad reflection, I suppose, of what we've seen in terms of similarities and differences.
That's super, Jim. Really helpful. I'd love to double click on one or two things. And Carol, if you don't mind bringing down the slides for a second. And at this point, maybe I should speak to everybody in the audience that we welcome questions throughout the webinar, and we'll try and address as many of them as possible. I think Jimmy made a couple of points that I definitely want to bring to discussion. One was on the last point around scientific relationships, right? And I guess even though both sides have a strong base when it comes to scientific relationships, it seemed to me that the message from the slide was that pharma is probably much more embedded and ingrained in maintaining that, and they have like the dedicated medical affairs, et cetera. Would love to hear maybe from you, John, on what does that actually look like for medtech, and do you actually believe that the scientific relationship management and how widespread that is just as much in medtech?
You know, that's a great question. And there's a lot of different med tech business models out there. But speaking from an implanted device perspective, neuromodulation, we do have very extensive relationships with clinical investigators all around the world because we're constantly running clinical studies on new features and new products.
And there's a related and good question that's just come in. What groups or functions within pharma should be responsible or open to digital health innovation? Go for it, Justin.
Yeah, I'll take that one. Yeah, that's a fun question, actually. I think this goes back to a bit of the fuzzy front end. I think within pharma, and obviously even thinking back to the notion of change management, most all groups are, and I think it depends on the overarching strategy and how directed the organizational strategy is. If you're thinking about software as a medical device, mobile medical apps, and really thinking about integrating it, around the pill versus above the pill, you're really talking about development organizations and even discovery in some cases. If you're more downstream and you're thinking more patient adherence, things that are maybe not regulated or as regulated, it's the commercial organization. And so it really depends on a particular pharma company's strategy ultimately, and even perhaps a franchises strategy. But my experience tells me that for the most part, all groups are open to it. But it just depends on the overarching strategy. And I think also, even back to one of the earlier points that you made, is this whole notion of what is the timeline for a return on investment, or when should we expect to see value come back? Commercial organizations, they're working on a 6-month to maximum 2-year horizon. Development organizations, and even thinking about development cycle times in pharma, on a much longer time scale. And so I think it's just having some awareness and knowledge of what group you're engaging, what are you bringing to them, and what is the time horizon and strategy that they're working against.
Yeah, I'd love to comment on that as well. What we've seen as MedTech is that the more people you can get around the table to help design that solution, the better off you're going to be. So I would be all for whoever's going to drive it. That's fine, but make sure you have representation from all of those different groups, and you're more likely going to have success and generate more value for the business and your customer.
Yeah, good old skin in the game, right? So that's really helpful. Jim, margin expectations, right? I guess that holds true on both sides, on the drug side and on the med tech side. But what are your thoughts on how we should think about it differently? Because ultimately, when they think about their business model, they go back to what's the margin that we're going to get from digital health, and compare and contrast that with the existing products, right? And that's probably where digital health cannot deliver the same or similar margin. So any thoughts on how to think about that differently?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I think the fundamental analysis, which is around this overlap between the unmet patient need, the unmet clinician need, and the real business need. And sometimes, it's very easy, or there's a tendency to say, hey, there's an unmet patient need there. And that may be true. And it may be a very noble cause, but the reality is that if you can't prove internally the business case within pharma for why pharma should be investing over multiple years, multi-million dollars around these initiatives, then it won't get sustained. There might be some passion for it initially, there may be some internal champions, but fundamentally there has to be a business case for it. And I think, again, there's 2 different categories. I think the around the pill, the therapy supporting digital health solutions, I think in reality, they're typically not charged for, so they're going to be you're going to need to build a business case which says this is the impact they're going to have on the core revenue. And then going back to the time frame piece, the reality is that's going to take a long time to prove. So then the question is, what are those internal milestones that you can have, or interim milestones that you can use to be able to demonstrate progress and to keep those kind of broad stakeholders on board, because ultimately, we are dealing with a complex ecosystem. We're bringing this complex solution into the market, into a complex health market. There is a high degree of uncertainty around it, and you need to constantly work on, building and keeping and sustaining the kind of stakeholder belief in what's required. And that requires some evidence, but you're not going to get the real ROI evidence, particularly if it's an impact on the core product, for some time. It's going to take multiple years to see that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. We want to keep this super interactive, and thank you. I see more questions trickling in. While I address the next question, Carol's going to put up a quick poll that everybody in the audience can answer, and we'll share all of the results with you after this webinar, but we want to gauge the temperature in the room and see what your opinion is. So the question is, what is the main reason that pharma programs get canceled? And while folks answer that, I'm just going to squeeze in one more question. Digital health is often seen as a nice to have within pharma. However, the relevance of medical device will grow exponentially given the interconnection between AI and SAMD. So could you share your thoughts on how you see pharma approaching this?
You want me to take that one again?
Yeah, go for it, Justin.
Yeah, sure. So that's a really, really good one. And I think it goes back to the second slide that I shared, where we really see above the pill, around the pill, beyond the pill, all these different perturbations of how we're starting to, integrate digital tools, technologies, features into the actual product of the actual medicine. And so I think that's one of the things that you'll see to continue to evolve. I think one of the things that's really important is to acknowledge, that I would say within the pharmaceutical industry, one of the most significant areas of contribution that I think that the industry will make to digital health is around the ability to generate evidence. And so if you think about, running clinical trials, the various phases, and just, there is a significant horsepower there to understand how you generate evidence to substantiate an effect on health, right? Just broadly speaking. And so taking advantage and leveraging that and starting to think about digital biomarkers, closed loop treatment, certainly closed loop treatment as we think about in the diabetes space has been evolving for a lot of years, but how do we bring closed loop treatment with these different tools, clinical decision support, generating evidence into a lot of the other different therapeutic areas that we're advancing. And then even beyond that, thinking about closed loop behavior. I mean, there is a regulatory expectation now that we actually understand patient experience and quantify patient experience. And so it's not going to be a nice to have in the very near future. It's going to be a must have. And so I think, the approaches will vary. I think all of them will really leverage the horsepower around generating evidence through clinical trials.
Justin, I have a sort of follow-up question on that for you. In medtech, we talk about different business models, some that are based on, direct revenue from a digital health solution, some that are based on maybe pull-through revenue by getting access to more patients. And you're talking about maybe a third option, which is, monetizing that data to improve the operations of the business. When you look at those areas where there's been success and failure in pharma digital health, is there a particular business model that's more likely to be successful?
Yeah, I mean, so that's a really fun question. And I think if we were to start from scratch, we could probably come up with some very effective business models. One of the challenges that we have, and if I think about, certainly within the US, sometimes even perhaps, single payer systems, tender contracts, reimbursement, and all these types of things are also going to affect, what we do. And so, I think for the short term, I think, you will see an integration of these, and the existing model for which we operate under is the one that persists. Now, that being said, as we start thinking about the democratization of healthcare in different ways, and that data is generated, there does become opportunities to actually leverage the data in other ways. There's some other organizations out there working on connected cohorts and things of that nature. We've certainly seen, what big tech has done in certain cases around data. And so I think that, just like any other innovation, the technology's there, and I think the business model will evolve. But I think for pharma, I think it's going to be, at least in the short term, going to be pretty difficult to really diverge from the models that we're operating within today.
Yeah.
Reimbursement, and a lot of just the way we contract medicine, and the, just competitive nature, even sometimes when generics come in. And so it's really about how do you upscale an existing franchise and existing medicine to become more competitive, or to dramatically affect patient experience and outcomes in such a way that it impacts revenue under the existing model.
Yeah.
So it sounds like, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead, John. I'll let you finish.
So when I heard it, I just want to make sure, it sounds like more like the pull-through model or the data-based model are more likely than a patient or clinician pay model likely to be successful in pharma. So
at the moment, and I think that's one of the big changes, and that's all a question on AI, or that's starting to come up in machine learning. The democratization of healthcare, when you have thinking about a citizen scientist or a patient who is very empowered, I think that's when you'll start to see the pull-through in particularly different ways, and where pharma will have to really start to, lean into that product definition in a different way than we have been.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I'd add to that is just that what might happen is that, pharma will focus on those core models around the pill and showing impact on core revenue, but maybe in parallel, the industry will evolve so that, which hasn't fully happened yet, and so that digital therapeutics companies and digital health companies find a way to good reimbursement for digital health. And once that happens, then I don't think pharma will lead the way in that. But once that happens, then that opens up the opportunity, I think, for pharma to add that as another thing. I don't think it'll lead the way.
Yeah. So the chat is hopping, which is really good. I want to try and address as many of the questions as possible. But before we do that, we do have a couple more really interesting slides from John. I want to close out on the poll. For me, the key takeaway from the poll is that it's great that regulation, buy-in from HCPs, internal stakeholder buy-in. These are not even the largest challenges. So it's more so around budgetary scrutiny, longer timelines, more expensive, things that we can actually fix by aligning at the very beginning. It sounds like is the consensus from the audience. And on that note, John, we'll look to you to give us your take on and your perspective on how MedTech has done digital health and what some of the learnings are. Carol, if you don't mind bringing up the slides.
Thank you, Chandana. So having been in this industry for 23 years, this is a really exciting time because there's an alignment between the expectations of our clinician and patient customers and the capabilities of the technology that make the kind of digital health solutions that we're going to talk about today really possible. So I think that is great. And they're going to, I think, flip to slide 6 in a second here. So at Inspire, we are an example in the medtech space of application of digital health. But there are others. Another really good example that many people might be aware of is diabetes products that often include sensors, pumps, smart pens for injections, and mobile apps that connect all of these items or connect a complete ecosystem for the patient and allow them to more effectively manage their therapy and for the clinicians to track their management. For Inspire, there we go. We really start with our patient and our clinician ecosystem. So in our patient ecosystem, and we're still looking at the, well, that's all right, we'll go with this. But in the patient ecosystem, you can see we have our patient. This is actually one of our patients who's a patient ambassador, which is a really neat thing that we have, which is patients who have our therapy who are willing to get out there and talk to other patients about it and share their experiences. And that's the kind of thing with a digital health platform that you can actually amplify as well by helping to connect those patient ambassadors with prospective patients in the future. Those patients obviously have an implant and they have a remote that allows them to turn their therapy on and off. On the clinician side, they have a more advanced tool that allows them to see how the patients are using their therapy. And so starting with that patient ecosystem and that clinician ecosystem, we're able to apply a systemic thinking process, systemic analysis projects. You might have heard of like the words design thinking, right? Which is trying to identify what all happens within the patient's ecosystem and what all happens within the clinician's ecosystem, and where are the opportunities to improve their experience with the therapy as well as our business at the end of the day, right? And so when we look and think about those patient opportunities, we came away with, how can we improve outcomes for those patients so that they feel better every day? And that really comes down to making sure they're using the therapy in an appropriate way and that they're staying engaged with their clinician. On the clinician side, productivity is really important. And when you think of productivity, you think of both efficiency in the time that you spend with patients, making sure you're spending the time with the right patients, but also the payment that goes along with it. And we're at a point of inflection, not only in the technology and the expectations of our customers, but in the payment systems as well. So in the US, there are new payment codes for remote therapy monitoring, where clinicians who are spending the time to engage with these digital tools and engage and treat their patients using them can actually get payment for that work or for the work of the people on their staff. And I'm not as familiar on a worldwide basis, but I know that there's similar payments that are starting to become available in Germany and other countries around the world. So that productivity piece can play into this. And part of that is seeing the patients who need to be seen and not seeing those patients who you don't need to, so that you can treat more patients and treat those at the greatest need. But there's also the confidence aspect, which is whenever you're prescribing a pill or an implanted device, there's that question of, is this thing working, right? And a digital solution can allow clinicians to clearly see, yes, this is working. The patient is being compliant to. We are having the expected outcomes. And that at the end of the day will improve their confidence and allow them to feel comfortable prescribing your therapy or your pill. And when it comes to differentiation, it's the same thing. If I'm confident with this, if I'm more productive with this, then I'm going to choose this as the option for more and more of our patients. So with that patient-centric and clinician-centric view, we really at Inspire took the next step and said, how can we solve those problems with a connected digital solution? And one of the things that Chandana and Jim both mentioned is the importance of partnering, right? We are a technology company that first and foremost came from implantable neuromodulation. We are not, or were not when we started this, experts at the cloud and mobile apps. So we partnered with folks like S3 and others who can help us gain that expertise and deliver these platforms that we want. And what we really bring is that understanding of what are those clinician needs, what are those patient needs, and how can we engage them appropriately? And then what our partners bring is the understanding of those digital tools and platforms that we can leverage. And when you think about the digital technology that's moving forward and accelerating digital health, oftentimes you think of the devices that are on your wrist or on your phone that are very visible. But a lot of the digital technology in the mobile platforms like Android and iOS and in the cloud like Azure and Google really allow you to deliver these solutions, leveraging really advanced platforms that make it simpler to deliver, easier to demonstrate compliance with those platforms, and easier to get them into hospital systems because you're using a known platform that has readily available integration points. So leveraging those tools, we were able to deliver something to clinicians that allows them to see on a night-by-night basis when patients are using their therapy, how they're feeling, and it allows clinicians to manage patients by exception. On the patient side, we have a mobile app that engages with them from the time they're thinking about our therapy, educates them on it using a Netflix-like interface where there's videos that explain the therapy, and then allows them to find a doctor in their area. It allows them to do a virtual check-in and provide information to their clinician about how they're doing in a long form or on a simple day-by-day basis saying, hey, I'm feeling good or I'm not. And that allows the clinician to connect what are the settings the patient's using, what's the patient adherence and what are those outcomes in a way that really makes them feel confident in the therapy and allows us, as appropriate, to help educate that patient or coach them to improve their own outcomes. Now, once we have this database that includes all this information, the opportunities are huge. And Justin talked a lot about real-world evidence. And we've been using this database to collect information about how patients are using our therapy and what patients are implanted. And we've actually been able to take that information and bring it back to the FDA and have changes to our indications based on that. So the FDA and other regulators around the world are very much open to this kind of information because what happens in the real world is often different from clinical studies. And in our case, it indicates that, boy, there's more patients that can be treated with our therapy than we thought. And it allows us to expand that population. It's also been a platform for innovation for us because we've been able to see what patients are doing with the therapy, how clinicians are using the platform, and identify other maybe points of friction in the care pathway and allow us to target those with different interventions and measure whether or not those interventions have been successful. Next steps for us are integration more deeply into electronic health records, which are an opportunity for us to simplify the patient workflow even further by reducing the amount of data entry between these systems, as well as making both billing more seamless in the EHR and our platform more powerful. Also, integration with third-party devices, such as Withings, for example, is one example, and this is their sleep mat. It goes under your bed, but it actually has CE mark to measure AHI, which is the severity of obstructive sleep apnea. And so it allows us to have, in addition to, hey, are the patients using it and feeling good, but also, are they well treated, all as part of that ecosystem. And to not only let the patient know that, so they're confident in their therapy and they know when they use it, they're better, and when they don't, they're not, but also makes that clinician confident and allows the clinician to bill for that work. So we are really excited about the future of digital health. We think it's not only going to improve access to the therapy for more patients because it helps educate them, it makes our providers more efficient, but it also is going to help us expand access and expand our labeling through the data that we're collecting. We do think that in the future, there'll be an opportunity also to realize revenue as part of this platform as we add more and more advanced features. So that is something we're also looking at. So when it comes to business models, and I would say that we're taking the all of the above approach, and we're going to learn, I think, over time, what is the most effective.
That's really helpful. Thank you, John. And Carol, we can bring down the slides just to have a conversation. you actually answered at the very end my exact question to you. It sounds like from a technology and product point of view, you really, and it's not just you, I guess MedTech really has it figured out, but what about corresponding business models? And is it very much based on just feature add-ons? Is it like a licensing model? Can you talk to that a little bit?
Yeah, I think it's different in different markets. So if we look at in the pacemaker market, for example, all of these pacemakers are all talking back to EHR systems and remote patient monitoring platforms, but it has become a commoditized feature. So it's something that is required to have access to that market, and they can't really bill for it separately. Although they try, it hasn't been as successful. In other areas, like for example, in CPAP, there are all these digital health solutions, and those have actually been required by the insurance companies because frankly, patients don't like using CPAP, and that's why Inspire exists in the first place. To even enable reimbursement. So the insurance company won't pay for it unless there's that monitoring in place. So I would say that it's different by market, but yeah, we haven't completely figured it out. One of the things that's going to change the game, though, is the payers coming to the table and saying, hey, we learned a lot from this pandemic experience. We've been paying for this remote monitoring, and now we're going to find a way to, systemize that, make it a permanent part of the healthcare system.
Thank you. We have another poll question for the audience, very much related to comparing and contrasting pharma. So we see both different and shared characteristics between pharma and medtech, as Jim brought us through. But who's further ahead in terms of integrating digital health into their core strategy?
Well, I guess I'll jump in on that. I'm not too sure about the pharma side, but I think for medtech, it's going to be required, right? And it's because the clinicians want it, the patients want it, and more the payers want it. So I think that it's something that is going to be expected in medtech, and it's going to be delivered as a matter of course. And the business models are sorting themselves out, but I do think that there's going to be an opportunity for companies to realize revenue in a variety of different ways that will make it very much worth their while to deliver these types of solutions.
And Justin, I'm going to ask you a related question from the audience, kind of along this theme. What about the modality of action or the mode of action of the therapy? So what are your perspectives on the value around the pill or around the therapy, digital, oral versus infusion versus subcutaneous? Does that actually impact the ability to scale?
Yeah, sure. No, I think it's an interesting question. I think maybe mode of action, certainly, I think even they're also indicating route of administration from what I can gather here as well.
That's correct.
Yeah. So I think when you think about route of administration and the ability to integrate digital tools, certainly subcutaneous injection, intradermal injections, and infusion to some extent provide you a much more direct access, if you will, to that intimate moment with the patient that is needed to deploy that digital intervention or to actually have that digital tool come to life. Obviously there's been a tremendous number of oral medication solutions, mainly around adherence for a number of years now. And certainly Proteus was, a really interesting technology that came along. But I think, the subcutaneous, again, you have a much more intimate moment with the patient, at that point of injection. And so that creates, I think a very different opportunity. I think, one of the things that we'll see over time, and especially with closed loop behavior, and if we think about other algorithms that exist in our lives, whether it be Netflix or Amazon or, consumer-based algorithms, the more we start to understand the human condition and think about closed loop behavior, even oral medications, oral delivery are going to start to be an opportunity for us to advance, in terms of value that we can deliver with, digital tools.
I'll just take the opportunity to address one other question that's come up here. Novel digital endpoints, can these help de-risk investment for pharma with early signal detection, et cetera? Any thoughts on that? That's really for Jim and Justin.
Jim, you want to go first?
Yeah, I can start. And I know you've got good opinions on this as well, Justin. So yeah, I think the idea of digital biomarkers, novel endpoints, is super interesting. It's a long process. It's also something that obviously, if they could be introduced into the clinical trial phase, it makes them super valuable, and then it easier translates into the commercial phase. But I think there's often a little bit of risk aversion in terms of introducing new digital novel endpoints into clinical trials, because again, it's back to, the core product is everything currently. So I think conceptually, it's a fantastic way to build confidence within pharma organizations around digital technologies and to add real value. But I think there's quite a bit of risk aversion around it.
Yeah, and then from my perspective, and I think in terms of de-risking, when you start to think about longitudinal continuous monitoring of physiological and behavioral parameters with tools, and actually starting to quantify things that historically we'd never had access to, and doing it in such a way where you have significant signal to noise ratio, because it's continuous and longitudinal, and on top of that, you can do it in a composite way, so you can actually start to combine the digital tools with traditional biological markers that we traditionally measure. You are able to detect things that you've never seen before. And so I think, and you can start talking about in silico clinical trials coupled to these types of things, some really interesting things that start to emerge. So I do think there's going to be, especially with, and I mentioned it earlier, this whole notion of connected cohorts and understanding baseline health, physiological as well as behavioral. You'll be able to have signal to noise and detect things and understand treatment effectiveness in ways that typically you wouldn't have until you were at scale and much further in terms in investment. And so we'll see. And I think, Jim kind of also hit the nail on the head, kind of the holy grail within clinical trials is do no harm. And so bringing in new tools, to hope, to perturb, if you will, or trying to help, but sometimes it perturbs clinical trials. That's a challenge too. And so I think that, it's going to behoove us and really, the onus is on us to try to figure out really creative ways where we can do no harm to the very traditional approach to clinical trials for safety and efficacy that we're trying to demonstrate. But can we create subroutines where we can actually start to use these tools in parallel and perhaps in concert, to get at exactly that of the notion of de-risking and having a much greater signal to noise.
Yeah. And just to draw your attention to the poll we ran, it's the winner is really clear. Everybody believes that medtech is either further ahead in terms of understanding product and business models, or at least the technology and the product and figuring out the business model. We have a clear winner. So definitely a long ways to go for pharma based on the perspectives of the group that's listening in. And with that, maybe Jim, if you can maybe give us some of the key messages that we should all walk away with today after this session, that'll be really helpful. And Carol, if you can bring up the slides. What are the key considerations for pharma?
Thanks, Santana. Yeah, and actually one of the first point is around, I think that in some way the opportunity and need for pharma is even bigger than medtech. And one of the words I kind of was scribbling as John was talking was, I've seen most of the words before in terms of patient and clinician benefits, but one word that we don't use a lot, I think, on the pharma side is confidence, right? So that notion of building confidence in clinicians that that the therapy and the treatment is working. And again, traditionally, how does that work in pharma? It works because you build up an evidence base from the clinical trial process, and then based on that, clinicians decide to prescribe, right? But we all know that for pharmaceutical products, they're complex products, complex mechanisms of action, and whether they work for individual patients depends on lots of factors: genetics, the ecosystem in which they are, and also patient behaviors and adherence and all of those complex things. So the opportunity for pharma to use digital health to be able to monitor, track that, and improve it in some way is larger because of those complexities, I think. It's complex but larger. So that's an observation. The second point is, and we I think the first poll, the result was that one of the challenges was in demonstrating value, clearly demonstrating value, and that's why a lot of programs don't proceed. I think this constant understanding and alignment around the overlap between the patient, clinician, and pharma need, and and reflecting that into the metrics that are put in place to measure the milestones as the Digital Health Initiative evolves is really key. That comes up in the third point again, this planning from concept to adoption to scale. We've seen lots of programs where there's a huge amount of emphasis put on the concept, validating the concept, doing the primary research, talking to patients, talking to clinicians, etc., and then pushing ahead, but often without any real planning around how it's actually going to get into the market or how it's going to scale. And that's somewhat thought about later when it gets closer to that point. But the reality is that's the biggest failure point in these programs is this transition from product existing to product actually being adopted, because that process in itself is very complicated, and it's the main failure point that we see. So you do need a multi-year plan, these incremental milestones and measurable milestones, but a clear thinking through of how the adoption piece is going to happen. And the last piece I'd say is, I think we all recognize there's a high degree of complexity here from a regulatory perspective, from a data management perspective, from a go-to-market strategy perspective, from a reimbursement perspective. And what you don't want is that everyone is resolving the same problem every time. So there needs to be learning across industry, but also within these large companies. And I think often what we see is that there's individual initiatives that are repeated over and over without kind of platform thinking that says, okay, there's certain problems we've got to solve once, and there's going to be differences across each different use case, but let's solve those set of problems once and not each individual time.
That's really helpful. In the last couple of minutes, I would like to ask Justin for your one piece of advice to folks who are more focused on the medtech industry based on your learnings from pharma, and the other way around for you, John. Your one recommendation to the pharmaceutical industry and partners of the pharmaceutical industry based on your learnings from the medtech industry. Who'd like to go first?
Yeah, I'll jump in really quick. Go first. Yeah, I think one of the things, if you compare and contrast, right? I mean, and I've worked in both kind of areas. MedTech is a lot of mechanical engineers or engineers, just broadly speaking. On the pharma side, there's a lot of life sciences, if you will. I think, my recommendation, going probably both ways, but if I were to kind of indict MedTech for a moment, really bring to life, the clinical and life sciences as much as you can as you pursue digital health. I think, that will start to, you not only do you generate the evidence, but I think you understand the underlying science and physiology that's at play, the clinical side of things in a much deeper way. So I would say really start to activate the life science and think about the fusion of engineering and clinical science as much as you can.
Perfect. And John?
I'm going to say something that may sound simple, but I find that for us, it's the key, which is make sure you're solving an important problem for the patient and the clinician. And if you do that, you're going to have a great solution and the rest will follow.
Terrific. Well, I just want to say thank you to all three of you. This has been such a terrific hour. Lots of insights shared. Appreciate your time and sharing your experience with us. And thanks to everybody for joining us as well. Have a nice rest of the day.
Thanks,
Thank
guys.
you.
Thanks all.
Bye-bye.